The rain hammered against the cabin roof like angry fists. As I stood with my 6-year-old son Noah, our matching blue raincoats dripped onto the already soaked wooden floor. Water streamed through dozens of ceiling cracks, forming puddles that reflected our tired faces. This pathetic shelter had cost my last $500, all I had left after Richard emptied our accounts and walked out 3 weeks ago. Noah squeezed my hand and looked up with those trusting eyes that broke my heart. "Is this really our new home, Mommy?" Before I could answer, something heavy crashed through the ceiling, splashing into the puddle at our feet, a tarnished gold locket I recognized instantly from my grandmother's photos. The grandmother who vanished decades ago, hundreds of miles from this place. Before we begin, I'm curious, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Let me know in the comments below. Hit subscribe for more extraordinary true stories. I never imagined I'd be 32, single and homeless with a 6-year-old son and only $500 to my name. But that's exactly where I found myself after 12 years of marriage. To Richard ended with him cleaning out our bank accounts and disappearing with his 24-year-old assistant. The divorce left me with nothing but my car, my son Noah, and a desperate need for shelter. The cabin wasn't even listed with a real estate agent. I found it on an obscure local message board. Remote cabin needs work. $500 cash as is. The price alone should have warned me, but desperation makes fools of us all. The elderly seller couldn't get rid of it fast enough, his hands actually trembling as he pushed the rusted key into my palm. "The place has troubles," he muttered, refusing to meet my eyes. "But it's yours now." I should have asked what troubles meant. Instead, I thanked him for accepting my pathetic offer and watched him hurry away like he was escaping something. The drive to our new home was long and winding, the road narrowing until trees pressed in from both sides. Noah slept in the back seat, surrounded by our meager possessions, mostly clothes and his favorite books. Everything else was gone, sold to buy gas and food for our journey. The cabin appeared suddenly around a bend, a sagging wooden structure that might have been charming 50 years ago. Now it looked like a strong wind might collapse it. Still, it was ours. A roof, walls, a beginning. We didn't even make it through the first night before the rain started. Heavy drops pounded the roof, quickly finding every weakness in the ancient shingles. Soon water dripped, then poured through a dozen spots in the ceiling. Noah and I moved our sleeping bags 3 times before giving up and sitting awake in our raincoats, watching our new home fail its first test. My father would have laughed at my foolishness. He'd always said I made poor choices, just like my grandmother Eleanor. He rarely spoke of her, only to say she'd abandoned the family when he was 10, running off with another man and leaving nothing but heartache behind. The way he told it, disappearing was in my blood. Now here I was, starting over in the middle of nowhere, wondering if I was just another generation of Mercer women making terrible decisions. As the rain continued its assault, I held Noah close and made a silent promise. This would not be our ending, only our difficult beginning. The cabin looked even worse in daylight. Water damage stained nearly every surface, and the persistent dripping hadn't stopped despite the clearing skies outside. I sent Noah to explore the small yard while I assessed the damage, armed with the single toolbox I'd managed to keep during the divorce. I climbed on a rickety chair to examine the worst of the ceiling leaks in what would become our bedroom. The water had softened an entire section of the ceiling, and when I poked it with a screwdriver, chunks of wet plaster crumbled away. Behind the plaster was an unusual space, not just the expected roof beams, but what looked like a small compartment. My curiosity pushed aside my frustration. I worked the screwdriver around the edges, pulling away more of the damaged ceiling until I could reach inside. My fingers touched something cool and metallic. I pulled it out and nearly fell off the chair. A locket. Not just any locket, but one I recognized instantly from the few family photos my father had kept. It was distinctive, oval-shaped gold, with a delicate floral pattern engraved on the front. This exact locket hung around my grandmother Eleanor's neck in the last photo taken of her before she disappeared in 1979. My hands trembled as I clicked it open. Inside was a tiny black and white photo of a young boy, my father at about 8 years old, and a small curl of dark hair. My grandmother's locket, hidden in the ceiling of a cabin, hundreds of miles from where she had supposedly abandoned her family. It made no sense. According to my father, Eleanor had left them in Pittsburgh. What was her locket doing here, in a remote cabin I'd randomly purchased? Before I could process this discovery, Noah's voice called from another room. "Mom, the floor is squishy here." I found him jumping on a section of floorboards that bowed under his small weight. When I pulled him back and examined the area, I noticed one board was slightly raised, wedging the screwdriver underneath. I pried it up to check for water damage. Instead, I found a stack of yellowed photographs wrapped in plastic. The top image showed a woman with my eyes and jawline standing in front of this very cabin. She was smiling, but her eyes held something that looked like fear. I flipped it over and felt my breath catch. Written in faded blue ink, "Eleanor at Pinwood, April 1979. My grandmother. Here." The month before, she supposedly ran off with another man. Noah peered over my shoulder. "She looks like you, Mommy." My mind raced with impossible questions. How could my grandmother be connected to this cabin? Why had my father never mentioned this place? And how, in all the vast world, had I randomly purchased the very property where she'd once stood? With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called my father. We hadn't spoken much since the divorce. He'd made his disappointment and my failure clear enough, but now I needed answers. "Dad," I said when he answered, "I need to ask you something important. Did Grandmother Eleanor ever own a cabin in the mountains?" The silence lasted so long I thought we'd lost connection. "Where are you?" His voice, when it finally came, was strange, tight, with something I couldn't identify. "I bought a cabin. There are pictures of Grandmother here, and her locket was hidden in the ceiling. Get out of there." His voice had shifted from strange to frightened. "Take Noah and leave immediately. Don't tell anyone where you've been. Don't touch anything else." "Dad, what are you talking about? What's going on?" "That place is dangerous, Olivia. Your grandmother never abandoned anyone, but that cabin is why she disappeared. Get out, now." The call ended abruptly. I stood frozen, the locket in one hand, the photograph in the other, as another section of ceiling collapsed, sending a shower of dust and debris onto the floor behind me. Something else had fallen with it. The corner of what looked like a metal door embedded in the wall, previously hidden behind decades of paint and wallpaper. My father's warning echoed in my head as I stared at the metal door in the wall. Every practical instinct told me to grab Noah and run. But where would we go? With no money and no prospects, this leaky cabin was literally all we had. And now, with my grandmother's locket in my hand, it was also the first real connection I'd ever had to the woman who'd shaped my family's history by vanishing. "We're staying," I whispered to myself. Then, louder, to Noah, "Honey, how about you set up your books on that dry shelf while I make us something to eat?" After settling Noah with a peanut butter sandwich and his favorite dinosaur encyclopedia, I returned to the partially exposed metal door. It took an hour of careful work with a hammer and screwdriver to free it from decades of built-up paint and wallpaper. When I finally pulled it open, I found myself looking at an old-fashioned wall safe with a dial combination lock. I tried the obvious combinations first, my grandmother's birthday, my father's birthday, with no success. The safe remained stubbornly locked, another mystery in a house that was quickly revealing itself to be full of them. Turning my attention back to the photographs I'd found under the floorboard, I spread them across the driest patch of floor I could find. Most showed Eleanor at various spots around the property, standing by a now-gone garden, sitting on the porch steps, or walking along a nearby stream. In each one, the cabin looked well-maintained and loved, nothing like the decaying structure it had become. The final photograph was different, a formal portrait of 3 people. My grandmother, a man I recognized as my grandfather from the few family photos I'd seen, and another man, taller and broader, with a confident smile. They stood in front of what looked like an office building, with a sign reading Mercer and Fulton Investments. Fulton. The name struck a chord of recognition, but I couldn't immediately place it. I flipped the photo over where someone had written Eleanor, William, and Howard. New office opening. Howard Fulton. My grandfather's business partner, according to the sparse family history my father had shared. The man who had taken my father in after my grandparents were gone. The man who had raised him after Eleanor abandoned them and my grandfather died in what my father had always called an accident. I needed to know more. While Noah napped that afternoon, exhausted from the stress of our move, I drove into the small town about 20 minutes from the cabin. The local library was housed in a charming, historic building that had clearly seen better days, much like my new home. The elderly librarian perked up at the sight of a new face. "You must be the one who bought the old Fulton place," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Word travels fast around here." "Fulton Place?" I repeated, my heart suddenly racing. Howard Fulton owned my cabin? Oh yes, for decades. Kept it as a vacation property, though he rarely came himself after the first few years. "You're not related, are you? There was something in the way your eyes—" She trailed off, studying my face. "No," I said quickly. "Just a coincidence. Actually, I'm researching the cabin's history. Do you have local newspapers from the late 1970s? 2 hours later, I sat surrounded by microfiche printouts, trying to control my shaking hands. What I was reading contradicted everything I'd ever been told about my family. From the Pittsburgh Press, May 3, 1979. Local investment firm partner's wife missing. The article detailed how Eleanor Mercer had vanished during what was supposed to be a weekend trip to the family's mountain cabin. My grandfather, William, had reported her missing when she failed to return, claiming she'd gone alone to clear her head after an argument. From the same paper, May 10, 1979, search for missing woman scaled back. Authorities had found no sign of Eleanor Mercer after a week of searching the mountain area around the cabin. From the local Mountain Gazette, May 15, 1979, Pittsburgh woman's disappearance baffles local police. This article mentioned signs of disturbance at the cabin, but no concrete evidence of foul play. And most disturbingly, from the Pittsburgh Press, July 24, 1979, investment firm partner dies in boating accident. Just 2 months after Eleanor's disappearance, my grandfather William Mercer had drowned when his boat capsized on a local lake. The article noted he was survived by business partner Howard Fulton, who has taken guardianship of Mercer's 10-year-old son, James. My father, James Mercer, who had told me all my life that his mother had abandoned him, run off with another man, broken his father's heart so badly that the accident that took his life was almost a mercy. None of it aligned with these news reports. I drove back to the cabin with my mind spinning. My grandmother hadn't abandoned anyone. She had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. My grandfather hadn't died of a broken heart. He'd drowned shortly after his wife vanished. And Howard Fulton, the man who'd owned my cabin until recently, had become my father's guardian and apparently shaped the narrative of my family history. As I pulled up to the cabin, a chill ran through me, despite the warm day. Noah greeted me at the door, excitement on his face. Mom, I found something else while you were gone." He pulled me toward the bedroom, where the safe was located. On the floor beneath it was a small key that must have fallen from some hidden compartment, when I'd been working on the wall. A key that looked exactly the right size for the tarnished lock on my grandmother's locket. The key fit the locket perfectly. With a small click, a hidden compartment opened behind the photograph and lock of hair, revealing a tightly folded piece of paper I'd missed during my first inspection. My hands trembled as I carefully unfolded it, revealing my grandmother's elegant handwriting. If found, please contact Detective Marcus Reed, Pittsburgh Police. Tell him Eleanor Mercer says follow the money. Winged and H stealing from clients. Proof in cabin safe. May want. A message never delivered. A cry for help never answered. I spent the next morning attacking the wall, safe with renewed determination. The combination remained elusive, but now I had a purpose beyond curiosity. My grandmother had hidden evidence here, evidence of something serious enough that she'd felt the need to contact the police. "What are we looking for, Mom?" Noah asked, watching me try various combinations. "The truth," I told him, ruffling his hair, "about our family." By mid-afternoon, I admitted temporary defeat with the safe and decided to seek more information in town. This time, I took Noah with me, unwilling to leave him alone at the cabin after everything I'd discovered. The hardware store seemed like a good place to start gathering information without raising suspicions. We needed supplies to fix the leaks anyway. The owner, a warm-faced woman in her 60s named Margaret, smiled at Noah before turning her attention to me. "You're staying out at the old Fulton place, aren't you?" Brave woman. She started gathering the roofing tar and patches I'd requested. "I've heard people call it that before. Do you know much about Howard Fulton?" I kept my tone casual, just a new homeowner curious about local history. Margaret's hand stilled for just a moment. "I knew of him. Big shot from Pittsburgh, who bought that place back in the 70s, hardly ever used it after the first year or so." She lowered her voice. "There was talk, you know, about the woman who went missing up there." My heart raced. Missing woman? Before my time, really. I was just a teenager. But my mother talked about it sometimes. A city woman disappeared from that cabin. They searched for weeks, but never found a trace. She studied my face. "You look a bit like her now that I think about it. The pictures they showed in the papers." "Really?" I worked to keep my voice steady. "What else do you remember?" "Not much, just that it was all very tidy." The investigation wrapped up quickly. Some folks thought too quickly. Margaret leaned forward. "My brother Frank might know more. He worked for the sheriff's department back then, before he retired." An hour later, Noah and I were sitting in Frank Davis's living room. The retired deputy had agreed to meet after his sister called ahead. At 70, Frank's body might have slowed, but his mind remained sharp, his eyes alert as they assessed me. "You favor her," were his first words after introductions. "Eleanor Mercer, same eyes, same way of holding yourself." "She was my grandmother," I admitted. "I never knew her." Frank nodded slowly. "Not surprising. The official story was she ran off, abandoned her family. But none of us local law enforcement ever believed that. She wasn't the type." "What do you think happened to her?" I asked, feeling Noah press closer to my side, sensing the tension. "Can't prove anything. But that investigation was shut down from above before we'd properly started. State police took over, then suddenly it was closed. Voluntary disappearance, they said." Frank's weathered face hardened. Meanwhile, her husband barely searched for her, seemed more concerned with getting back to Pittsburgh. And that business partner of his, Fulton, he was around a lot, handling everything, speaking for Mercer. "Howard Fulton," I said. "He raised my father after my grandfather died." "Convenient," Frank muttered. 2 months after Eleanor vanishes, William Mercer drowns in a boating accident, and Fulton gets everything, the business guardianship of the kid, and that cabin, which he keeps but hardly uses, always struck me as strange. As Frank spoke, Noah wandered to the window, bored by adult conversation. "Mom," he called suddenly, "that car is going really slow past the house." Frank moved with surprising speed to the window. "Black sedan," he noted. "No plates I can see. Tinted window." "Is that unusual?" I asked, a chill running through me. "In this town, where everybody knows everybody." "Very." Frank pulled a curtain across the window. "How much digging have you been doing into the past, Mrs. Mercer?" "It's Olivia. And enough to know my family history isn't what I thought." Frank nodded grimly. "Then you should know, Howard Fulton's nephew is Senator James Fulton, powerful man in this state, the kind who might not appreciate old secrets being dug up." The car passed by again as we were leaving. Frank noticed my worried glance and pressed a piece of paper into my hand. "My number. Day or night. And maybe get some cameras for that cabin." That evening, while Noah slept, I returned to the safe with new determination. If my grandmother had hidden evidence of financial crimes, the combination might relate to money or finances. I tried dates of financial quarters, common accounting references, and finally, on a hunch, the number printed on the investment firm's address in the photograph. The safe clicked open. Inside, protected in a waterproof document sleeve, I found a stack of papers, financial records, account statements, and a handwritten ledger showing systematic theft from client accounts at Mercer and Fulton Investments. My grandmother, apparently the firm's bookkeeper, had documented everything, including transfers to offshore accounts in the names of both partners. But more chilling was the final document, a handwritten letter from my grandmother to Detective Reed, dated April. "I've confronted William about the embezzlement. He claims Howard forced him into it, threatening to expose past indiscretions. I don't know what to believe anymore. William insists we meet Howard at the cabin this weekend to work things out. I fear this confrontation, but I've made copies of all evidence and hidden them where Howard will never look. If anything happens to me, follow the money, particularly the Greenwood Trust transfers. There's millions unaccounted for, and I believe Howard has been the mastermind all along." She'd signed it simply Eleanor Mercer. A letter never sent. A warning never received. I was so absorbed in these documents, I almost missed the sound of tires on gravel outside. Glancing out the window, I saw the same black sedan that had circled Frank's house, now parked at the end of my driveway. As I watched, the headlights switched off, but the car remained. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking, for your son's sake." I stepped away from the window, heart pounding. Someone knew what I was doing. Someone was watching. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I returned to town, this time to the county records office. The clerk was initially reluctant to help until I explained I was researching my own family history, showing my ID to prove the Mercer connection. What I found stunned me. After William Mercer's death, Howard Fulton had not only taken guardianship of my father, but had also somehow gained control of all Mercer assets, including property and investments that should have gone into a trust for my father. Through a series of complex legal maneuvers, he'd effectively erased the Mercer financial legacy, absorbing everything into his own holdings. The cabin, originally purchased by my grandparents together, had been transferred to Howard's sole ownership just weeks after William's death, with my 10-year-old father's guardian signing away his inheritance rights. The clerk mentioned something else that caught my attention. The Greenwood Trust you asked about. That's still active. One of the largest family trusts in the state, currently managed by the Fulton Financial Group for the benefit of Senator Fulton. The Greenwood Trust, exactly what my grandmother had flagged in her final letter. When I returned to the cabin that afternoon, I knew immediately something was wrong. The door stood slightly ajar, though I was certain I'd locked it. Noah was with Margaret, who'd offered to watch him while I ran errands, so I cautiously entered alone. Someone had searched the place, thoroughly but carefully. Drawers were closed. but contents rearranged. The safe door hung open, but the documents were untouched, where I'd hidden them under a loose floorboard in Noah's room. Most disturbing was the message scratched into the kitchen table. Last warning. I called Frank immediately. He arrived 20 minutes later with a small security camera system. Been keeping this for emergencies, he explained, helping me set up cameras covering the cabin's exterior approaches. Won't stop them, but might make them think twice, or at least give us evidence. Who's them, Frank? I asked, fear and anger battling inside me. Powerful people protect themselves, Olivia. Howard Fulton built an empire partly on what he stole from your family. His nephew, the senator, inherited that empire. Men like that, they don't let anyone threaten what they have. As Frank worked on the cameras, I told him everything I'd discovered, the embezzlement evidence, the Greenwood Trust, the threats. Your grandmother was a brave woman, he said finally. She tried to do the right thing, and it likely got her killed. The question is, what are you going to do with what you know? I stared at the photograph of Eleanor, so like me standing in front of this very cabin. I'm going to finish what she started. That night, I picked up Noah from Margaret's house, thanking her for watching him. As we drove back to the cabin, Noah was unusually quiet, staring out the window at the darkening forest. The sad lady showed me something, he said suddenly. What sad lady, honey? The one in our house. In my dreams. She showed me where to look. He turned to me with solemn eyes. Under the big rock by the well. She says that's where the most important thing is. I nearly drove off the road. We didn't have a well, at least none that I'd seen. But children have imaginations, I told myself. Just coincidence that his dream mentioned a well when we'd been talking about the cabin's history. As we rounded the final curve toward the cabin, headlights flashed in my rearview mirror. The black sedan was back, following us home. The morning after the black sedan followed us home, I made a decision. Instead of running, I would investigate more aggressively. Noah and I couldn't live in fear forever, and the truth seemed our only protection now. I started with my grandmother's diaries from the safe, reading them chronologically to understand how she'd discovered the embezzlement. Her entries began as routine accounts of daily life, but gradually revealed her growing suspicions about the investment firm's finances. March 3, 1979. Noticed discrepancies in the Greenwood Trust accounts again. William insists it's just Howard moving funds for better returns, but the numbers don't add up. Why won't he let me speak directly with Howard about this? March 15, 1979. Found evidence today that both William and Howard have been systematically stealing from client accounts for at least 3 years. Thousands of dollars each month, moved through a maze of transfers. What do I do? If I report this, William goes to prison. If I stay silent, I'm complicit. April 12, 1979. William finally admitted everything when I confronted him with the evidence. Says Howard masterminded the scheme, threatened to destroy him if he didn't participate. Claims he's been trying to get out, but Howard has leverage over him from some past mistake. Says we need to meet Howard at the cabin next weekend to negotiate an exit. I don't trust this plan. April 28, 1979. At cabin now. Howard arriving tomorrow. Have hidden copies of all evidence in case things go wrong. William seems terrified, drinking heavily, said something disturbing tonight, that Howard removes problems permanently. Am I in danger? Left message with Detective Reed to call me here, but phone line seems dead now. That was the final entry. Whatever happened the next day, Eleanor never wrote about it. She likely never lived to tell the tale. I placed the diary down, my hands shaking. My grandmother had uncovered a major financial fraud and likely been murdered for it. My grandfather, whether willing accomplice or coerced participant, had followed her to the grave shortly after. And my father, just a child, had been raised by the very man who may have orchestrated his parents' deaths. No wonder he'd told me Eleanor abandoned the family. That's what Howard would have wanted him to believe, easier than admitting he'd killed her. With renewed urgency, I explored the property, looking for the well Noah had mentioned in his dream. The cabin sat on nearly 5 acres of overgrown land, and it took hours of searching before I found it. An old stone well, its wooden cover rotted away, hidden behind a tangle of blackberry bushes about 100 yards from the house. Beside it lay a large, flat rock that took all my strength to move. Underneath, I discovered a rusted metal box. Inside, preserved in layers of plastic, was a small tape recorder with a cassette still inside, and a sealed envelope addressed to authorities in my grandmother's handwriting. I ran back to the cabin and found an old cassette player among the abandoned items in the shed. The tape contained a recording of a conversation between 3 people I could identify as my grandmother, grandfather, and presumably Howard Fulton. Eleanor's voice, so similar to my own. "I have copies of everything, Howard. If anything happens to us, the evidence goes straight to the SEC and FBI. A man's angry response. "Howard, you stupid woman. You have no idea what you're threatening. This goes beyond just a little creative accounting." My grandfather, slurring slightly. "Just let us walk away, Howard. We'll disappear, change our names. You can keep everything." Howard's laugh sent chills through me. "And trust you to stay quiet. No, there's only one way this ends for people who threaten what's mine." The recording continued with rising tensions until a sudden commotion, a scream cut short, and then silence. In the background, faintly, I could hear what sounded like digging. I felt physically ill. I'd just listened to my grandmother's murder, and potentially my grandfather's as well, which made his boating accident 2 months later even more suspicious. The sealed envelope contained a detailed confession from my grandfather, written the night before the confrontation, describing his unwilling participation in Howard's embezzlement scheme and his fear that Howard planned to eliminate both him and Eleanor. He documented how the money stolen from clients had been funneled into the Greenwood Trust, a vehicle created by Howard to hide the stolen assets. "Should anything happen to us," he wrote, "this trust rightfully belongs to our son James Mercer. Howard has no legal claim to these funds or our property." A signed confession and will, all in one. Evidence that had sat buried next to the well for 40 years. I immediately called Frank to share what I'd found. His voice was grave when he responded. "This is explosive, Olivia. That recording and confession implicate Howard Fulton in 2 murders and massive fraud, and by extension, it raises serious questions about how Senator Fulton's family fortune was built. What should I do with this? Go to the police?" "Not local," Frank warned. "We don't know who might be in the senator's pocket. I have a contact at the State Bureau of Investigation who can be trusted. But Olivia, once this moves forward, there's no going back. These people have protected this secret for decades. They won't stop now." As if to emphasize his point, a plain white envelope had been pushed under my door when I returned from checking the cameras. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Last chance. $250,000 for the cabin and all contents. Take the money and disappear, or face the consequences. You have 24 hours. They were offering to buy my silence, which meant they didn't know exactly what I'd found, only that I was digging. They thought this was a negotiation. I called Frank back immediately. "They've made an offer for the cabin. $250,000. "That tells us something important," Frank said. "They're worried, but not desperate. If they knew you had the recording or confession, the offer would be much higher, or there'd be no offer at all. Just threats," I finished his thought. "Exactly. We have a small advantage. They don't know what you know." That night, as Noah slept, I sat vigil by the window watching for the black sedan. My phone pinged with a message from a number I recognized immediately. Richard, my ex-husband. Need to talk. Important. About the cabin. My blood ran cold. How did Richard know about the cabin? We hadn't spoken in months, and I'd purchased it after our divorce. Unless the pieces suddenly clicked together. Richard had worked for a law firm with connections to state politics. He'd always had unexplained income beyond his stated salary. And he'd pursued me aggressively when we first met, despite my initial lack of interest. Had my entire marriage been part of their monitoring system? Had Richard been planted in my life to keep tabs on the granddaughter of Eleanor Mercer? I typed back, "What about the cabin, Richard?" His response came quickly, not over text. "They're watching both of us now. Meet me tomorrow." I showed the exchange to Frank the next morning. His expression grew even more concerned. "Be careful, Olivia. This could be a trap, or your ex-husband might genuinely be trying to warn you. Either way, it confirms my suspicions. This goes beyond just Howard Fulton's crimes 40 years ago. The senator and his people are actively working to contain this situation." As we spoke, Noah came running in from where he'd been playing on the porch. "Mom, I found another hiding place. Come see." He led us to a loose board on the porch steps that concealed a small cavity. Inside was a faded photograph I hadn't seen before, Howard Fulton standing next to a much younger man who looked remarkably like the current senator, both smiling in front of the cabin. On the back, dated August 1979, just months after my grandparents' deaths. Howard and James at the new property, fresh start. James. Not James Fulton, but James Mercer. My father. Frank's sharp intake of breath matched my own shock. "Your father knew," he said quietly. "He wasn't just an orphaned child in this story. At some point, he became a willing participant." The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Not only had my grandmother been murdered, but my own father had sided with her killer. Before I could process this revelation, the security camera feed on my phone showed a car approaching, not the black sedan, but a familiar silver SUV. Richard had arrived. Richard looked different than I remembered, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy as he constantly scanned our surroundings. He insisted we talk outside, away from the cabin, leading me to a clearing where he checked for listening devices before speaking. "I need to explain something, and you're going to hate me more than you already do," he began, running a hand through his hair. Our marriage wasn't entirely coincidental. Even though I'd suspected this, hearing him admit it sent a wave of nausea through me. "You were hired to marry me? By whom?" It wasn't that direct. I was a junior attorney at Fulton, Matthews, and Price when the name Olivia Mercer came across my desk. "Senator Fulton had a personal interest in your file, wanted updates on descendants of Eleanor and William Mercer. I was ambitious, eager to impress the partners. So when they suggested I keep an eye on you, maybe get close." 12 years, Richard. We built a life, had a child. My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay composed. "That's the thing, Olivia. It started as an assignment, but I fell in love with you. Really fell in love." His eyes pleaded for understanding. I reported less and less over the years, kept things vague. That's partly why they pushed me out of the firm last year. I wasn't being useful anymore. The affair? The cleaned-out bank accounts? Was that all theater too? The betrayal felt endless, each revelation worse than the last. Richard looked genuinely ashamed. The affair was real, my self-destructive response to the guilt. But the money, he lowered his voice. I didn't steal it. Fulton's people emptied the accounts when they realized I was no longer their loyal informant. They wanted to force you into financial desperation. Why? But even as I asked, I knew the answer. They've monitored your family for decades, making sure Eleanor's evidence never surfaced. When I stopped cooperating, they needed a new strategy. They arranged for the cabin to hit the market at exactly the price of your remaining money. They wanted me to buy it? This made no sense. Why lead me straight to the evidence? Because the evidence wasn't supposed to still be here. Richard looked toward the cabin. Howard Fulton allegedly recovered and destroyed everything after your grandparents died. The cabin was supposed to be clean. They expected you'd buy it, find nothing, and eventually sell when the maintenance became too much. Another dead end in a 40-year-old case. But I did find evidence. Eleanor outsmarted them. I couldn't keep the pride from my voice, which is why they're panicking now. That offer to buy the property, it's going to be their only peaceful approach. These people protect their legacy at any cost. These people include my father, don't they? I asked, showing him the photograph Noah had found. Richard nodded grimly. James Mercer was 17 when he learned what Howard had done. Rather than expose him, he chose to join him, became like a son to Howard, eventually taking the Fulton name professionally and politically, though never legally. The senator has been living a complete lie, built on your grandparents' deaths and your family's stolen legacy. The pieces aligned with horrible clarity. My father's coldness, his insistence that Eleanor had abandoned them, his distance from me after I'd once questioned the family history too persistently. Why are you telling me this now, Richard? Why risk crossing them? Noah, his voice softened. He's my son too, Olivia. When I realized they were watching the cabin, he couldn't finish the sentence. I've gathered information for years, insurance. I told myself, names, transactions, connections between the senator and certain unsolved accidents over the decades. I'm willing to testify to everything I know. As we walked back toward the cabin, Frank emerged from inside, his expression urgent. We need to move quickly, he said without preamble. My contact at the State Bureau says there's unusual activity around the senator's office. Document shredding. Emergency meetings. Someone spooked them. We need safeguards, I decided. No single point of failure. Working together through the afternoon, we created multiple copies of all evidence. The diaries, financial records, tape recording, and confession. Frank took one set to his contact. Richard secured another in a safe deposit box under a pseudonym. I kept the originals hidden in the cabin. What about Noah's safety? I asked, as evening approached. My sister can take him to her daughter's place 2 counties over, Frank offered. Nobody would think to look there. But before we could finalize these plans, Noah called from the porch where he'd been drawing. Mom, there's a car coming fast. Through the trees, I could see dust rising from the access road. The security camera feed on my phone showed a black SUV approaching rapidly, not the sedan from before, but clearly coming with purpose. Get Noah inside, Frank ordered, moving toward his vehicle where I knew he kept his old service weapon. Richard's face had gone pale. That's the senator's personal security detail. They're not here to negotiate. As I hurried Noah into the cabin's back room, my phone rang, a blocked number. Against my better judgment, I answered, Miss Mercer. The voice was smooth, cultured, and chillingly familiar from campaign advertisements. Senator James Fulton. My father's replacement. I believe it's time we discussed your cabin personally. I'll be arriving momentarily. The most powerful man in the state was coming to my doorstep, and he was the heir to my grandmother's murderer. The black SUV stopped at the edge of the clearing. 4 men in suits emerged first, scanning the area with the practiced efficiency of professional security. Then a 5th figure stepped out, tall, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. Even at a distance, Senator James Fulton radiated authority. Stay with Noah, I instructed Richard, who nodded grimly. Frank positioned himself on the porch steps, his hand near but not on his concealed weapon. Let me do the talking, he murmured as I joined him. I've dealt with his type before. The senator approached alone, leaving his security detail at a respectful distance. Up close, His resemblance to the young man in the photograph with Howard Fulton was unmistakable. The same calculating eyes, the same careful smile that never quite reached them. "Deputy Davis," he acknowledged, Frank with a nod. "It's been many years." "And Miss Mercer." His gaze shifted to me, studying my features with unsettling intensity. "You have your grandmother's eyes. You'd know, wouldn't you?" I couldn't help responding. "Since you chose Howard Fulton over your own parents." If my words surprised him, he didn't show it. "I see you've been connecting dots. Not always accurate ones, I'm afraid. May I come in? What I have to say isn't for open air." Frank and I exchanged glances. Having the senator inside meant his security would stay outside, a tactical advantage for us. "Your men stay where they are," Frank stipulated. Of course. The senator's easy agreement was more unsettling than resistance would have been. Inside the cabin, Senator Fulton surveyed the water damage and crude repairs with something like nostalgia. "This place never did stay dry, even when my parents owned it." "Your parents didn't own it," I countered. "My grandparents did, before Howard Fulton stole it, along with everything else that should have been my father's inheritance." Such certainty, he mused, removing an expensive overcoat and draping it carefully over a chair. "Youth always sees in black and white. Howard told me you'd be bright. It's in the bloodline," he said. "Why are you here, Senator?" Frank interrupted. "Your offer was rejected." "To increase it, naturally. $1 million seems more appropriate for the property and all its contents." His gaze swept meaningfully around the cabin. A fresh start for Miss Mercer and her son, somewhere far from here. "You're not buying evidence of murder," I said flatly. For the first time, the senator's composed facade flickered. Murder is a serious accusation, one that ruins reputations regardless of truth. Even unfounded allegations could be problematic for someone in my position. "We have the tape," I said, watching his reaction. "Eleanor's recording of that final confrontation and William's signed confession about the embezzlement scheme." The senator went very still. "Impossible." "Howard assured me everything was recovered." "Apparently not." He recovered quickly, his politician's smile returning. "Even if such items existed, their chain of custody is questionable. Recordings degrade. Handwriting analyses are contestable. And how would it look? A desperate divorcee, making wild accusations against a respected public servant, using dubious evidence that supposedly lay undiscovered for 40 years. Don't forget the witnesses," Frank added. "Richard's testimony about the surveillance operation on the Mercer family. My testimony about the deliberately mishandled investigation. Former deputies with grudges. Disgruntled ex-husbands." The senator waved dismissively. "Against the word of a 3-term senator with an unblemished record. The courts favor the credible, Deputy Davis, as you well know." He turned back to me, his voice softening. "I understand your position. You feel wronged. You've discovered unpleasant history. But consider your son. Legal battles are expensive, exhausting, and ugly. Even if you won, and you wouldn't, the victory would cost you years of your life, your peace of mind, possibly even your safety." "Is that a threat?" Frank's hand moved closer to his weapon. "A reality check. Powerful people have powerful friends. Howard protected me. I've protected others in turn. It's how the world works." He reached inside his jacket, causing Frank to tense, but removed only a checkbook. $2 million. Right now, you sign the cabin over to me, surrender all materials you found, and relocate out of state. A generous offer, considering the circumstances. Before I could respond, the cabin door opened. Richard stepped in, looking grim. "She's not interested in your money, Senator." The senator's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Chen, how disappointing to see you've chosen the losing side. Again." "I've made a full statement," Richard said, ignoring the barb, "detailing everything I know about the Fulton family's surveillance of Olivia, the financial manipulation, and your connections to Howard's operations. If anything happens to any of us, it goes public immediately. Where's Noah? I asked Richard quietly, suddenly aware my son wasn't visible. Safe, Richard whispered back. Just as we planned. The senator's expression hardened as he assessed the situation. I see negotiation is off the table. Unfortunate. He replaced his checkbook and moved toward the door. My final offer stands until midnight. After that, I cannot guarantee how events will unfold. As he reached for the doorknob, a small voice came from the back of the cabin. Mom, is the bad man gone yet? Noah. He'd hidden rather than leaving with Richard, as planned. The senator turned, a smile spreading across his face that chilled me to my core. Well, what have we here? Everything froze in that moment. Frank's hand hovering near his weapon, Richard's panicked expression, my heart hammering in my chest as the senator's gaze locked onto Noah, who stood in the hallway clutching his favorite dinosaur book. Interesting bargaining chip has just entered the conversation, the senator said softly. I moved instinctively, placing myself between Noah and the senator. This conversation is over. You need to leave. I don't think I will, the senator replied, his pleasant mask falling away. He gestured subtly toward the window. Outside, his security detail had moved closer to the cabin. We've reached the non-negotiable phase of our interaction. Your men can't help you if something happens to you in here, Frank warned, his hand now openly resting on his concealed weapon. The senator smiled coldly. Deputy Davis, always the brave one, but even you must realize the math. 4 trained professionals outside, the 3 of you in here, and a child to protect. Those aren't favorable odds. He was right, and we all knew it. Even if we controlled the immediate situation, we'd never make it off the property if his security team decided to prevent us. What do you want? I asked, drawing Noah against me. Everything. The tape, the confession, any copies you've made, and your permanent silence. The senator straightened his tie. In exchange, you get to walk away with your lives. A fair trade, considering the circumstances. And we're supposed to trust you, Richard asked, incredulously. Trust is irrelevant. Self-interest is reliable. I have no desire to create martyrs or mysteries. Deceased former spouses and old deputies attract attention. Living people who've signed comprehensive non-disclosure agreements and moved far away are forgettable. My mind raced through options, each worse than the last. We couldn't fight our way out. Running was impossible, but surrendering the evidence meant Eleanor's murder would remain buried, her killer's legacy intact and protected. Then Noah tugged at my shirt. Mom, he whispered, the sad lady is here again. The senator overheard, his eyebrow raising. Sad lady? His imagination, I said quickly, but Noah continued. She's pointing at the well. She says that's where he should look. The senator's composed expression faltered. What well? What's the boy talking about? Perhaps it was desperation, perhaps intuition, but I seized the moment of uncertainty. You never found her, did you? Howard told you he'd handled everything, but he never showed you where he buried Eleanor. This is nonsense, the senator snapped, but a new tension had entered his posture. Noah's been dreaming about her since we arrived, I pressed. A sad lady who can't find her way home. She's been leading him to evidence Howard missed, and now she's saying we should look at the well. Mom's right, Noah added with the perfect innocence of a child. She says her bones are still there. The senator's facade cracked visibly, a flash of genuine fear crossing his features. Howard assured me he'd taken care of everything properly. He lied, I said simply, just like he lied about destroying all the evidence, just like he lied about your father being a willing participant rather than another victim. Shut up, the senator hissed, composure evaporating. You know nothing about my father. I know he wrote a confession the night before he died, I countered, saying he was coerced by Howard, that he feared for his life, that everything rightfully belonged to his son, to you, James, not to Howard. The use of his birth name hit like a physical blow. The senator, James, actually staggered slightly. My father was weak, he finally said, willing to destroy everything we'd built rather than protect it. Howard saved me from that weakness. Howard murdered your parents, I said plainly. He stole your inheritance, and he convinced you to thank him for it. You have no proof. The well will prove it, I persisted. Eleanor's remains are still there. Modern forensics will show exactly what happened to her. And I suspect they'll find your father too. His boating accident was always too convenient. Frank moved cautiously toward the door. State Bureau investigators can have a search warrant for that well within hours, especially with the evidence we've already provided them. This was a bluff. We hadn't actually sent anything to the State Bureau yet, but the senator couldn't know that. Richard added his piece. My statement includes Howard's deathbed confession to me about where the bodies were hidden. He was quite proud of his thoroughness. Another bluff, but delivered with convincing confidence. For several tense moments, the senator stood frozen, mental calculations visible behind his eyes. Then, as if reaching a decision, he straightened and regained a shadow of his former composure. I've spent my entire career, my entire life, protecting Howard's legacy, my legacy. He glanced toward the window at his waiting security team, but perhaps it's time for a strategic repositioning. He turned to me, eyes cold and calculating. What exactly do you want, Miss Mercer? Justice, I said simply. For Eleanor and William, recognition of what was stolen from them, and from you. A bitter laugh escaped him. From me, I built an empire from Howard's foundation. An empire built on your parents' graves, Frank noted. On the fortune that should have been your birthright, not Howard's gift. Something shifted in the senator's expression. A flicker of the abandoned 10-year-old boy who'd lost both parents and been reshaped by their killer. If what you're saying is true, he said carefully, that Howard murdered them both, then I've built my life on a foundation of lies. Yes, I agreed, not softening the blow. You have. The senator moved to the window, signaling his security team to remain in position. Then he turned back to us. I want to see this evidence myself. All of it. The tape, the confession, everything. It was a risk, but perhaps our only path forward. I nodded to Richard, who retrieved the files from their hiding place. For the next 30 minutes, the senator listened to his mother's voice on the ancient tape recorder, read his father's desperate confession, and examined the financial records proving Howard's elaborate theft. With each piece of evidence, his expression grew more haunted. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its polished political tone. He told me they abandoned me, that my mother ran off and my father killed himself from the shame. He said he was the only one who wanted me. He lied, I said again, but gently this time. They were trying to protect you. That's clear from everything they left behind. The senator, James, looked suddenly older, the weight of 4 decades of misplaced loyalty visibly crushing him. What happens now? You use this to destroy me publicly. The great Senator Fulton, built on murdered parents and stolen fortune? That depends on you, I answered truthfully. Eleanor and William deserved justice, but revenge won't bring them back. Frank spoke up, his experience with human nature evident. There's a way forward that serves justice without unnecessary destruction. The Greenwood Trust, the one built with stolen client funds and rightfully belonging to the Mercer family, it could fund a foundation in Eleanor and William's names. For victims of financial fraud, for orphaned children. And the cabin? The senator asked, looking around at the water-damaged walls. Stays with me, I said firmly. It's where Eleanor's story can finally be told properly. And what about my story? He pressed. My career? Everything I've built? You tell the truth, I suggested. About Howard's crimes. About being manipulated as a child. You make it, right? Frank nodded agreement. A man who exposes decades of corruption and establishes a multi-million-dollar foundation to make amends. That's not a ruined man. That's a redemption story. For a long moment, the senator stood silent, the calculations of a lifetime visible in his expression. Then, he seemed to reach a decision. "The well," he said quietly, "we should examine it properly. If my parents are truly there," he didn't finish the sentence. As the tension in the room gradually eased, Noah approached the senator cautiously. "The sad lady isn't sad anymore," he announced. "She says thank you." The senator, James, looked at my son with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Children sometimes see things more clearly than adults," he murmured, then straightened with renewed purpose. "I'll instruct my team to stand down, and I'll make some calls. There are people who should be here, proper authorities, investigators. This won't be easy," I warned him. "For any of us." "No," he agreed, "but necessary things rarely are." As he stepped onto the porch to speak with his security team, Richard moved beside me. "You know this could still go badly. He could be buying time." "I don't think so," I replied, watching the senator's shoulders slump as he gave instructions to his clearly confused subordinates. "I think he's been living with Howard's ghost as much as I've been living with Eleanor's. Maybe it's time we both let them rest." Frank joined us, his weathered face showing cautious optimism. "One way or another, the truth about this place is finally coming out. After 40 years, that's something." Outside, the first drops of a new rainstorm began to fall on the cabin roof. But for the first time since we'd arrived, not a single drop made its way inside. The leaks, somehow, had finally stopped. 6 months passed before I stood again on the porch of the cabin. Our cabin now, properly renovated and watertight at last. The events following that confrontation with Senator Fulton had unfolded with a surreal blend of private reckoning and public spectacle. The excavation of the old well revealed exactly what Noah's sad lady had indicated: Eleanor's remains, carefully buried beneath layers of rock and soil. Nearby, in a second unmarked grave, they found William Mercer, my grandfather, whose boating accident had clearly been staged after his actual murder. Senator James Fulton, born James Mercer, held a press conference that shocked the state. He revealed the decades of deception, beginning with Howard Fulton's murder of his parents and systematic theft of their assets. He announced his immediate resignation and the establishment of the Eleanor and William Mercer Foundation, funded by the entirety of the Greenwood Trust, over $30 million of stolen money grown through investments over 4 decades. The media storm was intense, but brief. The redemption narrative Frank had predicted proved compelling. The manipulated orphan finally learning the truth and making amends. James avoided criminal charges in exchange for his complete cooperation with authorities investigating Howard Fulton's other suspected crimes. My father, when I finally confronted him, could barely meet my eyes. "I suspected," he admitted. "For years, I suspected. But admitting it meant facing what Howard truly was, and what that made me." Our relationship remained complicated, a wounded thing trying to heal. But Noah adored his newly discovered grandfather, and that connection gave us a starting point. Richard and I reached an uneasy peace. His role in exposing the truth earned my grudging respect, if not forgiveness. He moved to a nearby town, close enough to be present in Noah's life without intruding on mine. Some betrayals can never be fully repaired, but they can be transcended. Frank became a regular visitor, sitting on the porch with Noah, telling carefully edited stories of the old days. Margaret, from the hardware store, brought casseroles and gossip, delighted that the town's longest-running mystery had finally been solved. And the cabin, Eleanor's cabin, my cabin now, transformed from a symbol of desperation to one of reclamation. I used some of the foundation money to restore it properly, preserving its history while making it truly habitable. Noah stopped dreaming of the sad lady after the funeral we held for Eleanor and William on the property. "She's happy now," he explained simply. "She found her way home." As for me, I discovered something I hadn't expected when I spent my last $500 on this leaking shelter. I found not just my family's stolen history, but my own path forward. The foundation offered me a position leading its educational initiatives about financial fraud protection. My grandmother's courage became the blueprint for my own. Sometimes at dusk, when the light filters through the trees just so, I sit on the porch steps where Eleanor once stood in that yellowed photograph. I imagine her watching as Noah plays in the yard, safe and secure in a way her own child never had the chance to be. The cabin doesn't leak anymore. The secrets have all been revealed, and the woman who arrived desperate and broken has been replaced by someone stronger. Someone who finished what her grandmother started, 40 years later. Sometimes justice takes generations. But the truth, like water, always finds its way through. That's the end. Would you have been brave enough to confront a powerful senator with only old evidence to back you up? Share your thoughts below. For more incredible stories just like this, subscribe now. Our next story awaits your discovery.